book dedicated to the memory of those persons who lost their lives aboard the RMS Rhone on October 29th in 1867 will be added to the long list of book launching ceremonies launched through the assistance of the Department of Culture. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Ministry of Education and Culture, I am your GIS host, Bria Smith. And on this program, Director of Culture Mrs. Luz Hodge Smith and author Dr. Michael Mitch Kent join me to discuss the highly anticipated launch of the book, Twice She Struck, The Story of RMS Rhone, set to be launched on Thursday, June 29th at the J.R O'Neal Botanic Gardens at 5:30 p.m. Welcome, Dr. Kent. Welcome, Mrs. Hodge Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So, Dr. Kent, I'm going to start with you. This year marks 150 years since the RMS Rhone wrecked on the coast, or off the coast of Salt Island. How significant is your book to that event?
It's fortuitous, actually, that the book came out in the 150th anniversary, and I deliberately made sure it was out this year. Ultimately, it's a significant period of BVI history. When this ship sank, it was a significant event. The hurricane surrounding it and the subsequent earthquake and tsunami that followed just a few weeks later created chaos in the Virgin Islands and in many ways shaped the future history of the Virgin Islands.
Mrs. Hodge Smith, as a descendant of Salt Island, how important is this book to the natives of Salt Island?
Well, thank you, Bria, for that particular question. As a proud descendant of Salt Island, I must say that it is very important for us, and I take the liberty of speaking for the family and the descendants of Salt Island today to say that when the incident happened, our residents or family members that actually lived on Salt Island at the time were very helpful. From the oral history or the oral recollection that I know of and that I heard, they actually, and the evidence is there as well, they actually buried those that suffered, that lost their lives. So the people of Salt Island helped to bury those individuals, and over the years they maintained their graves, giving them that honor of maintaining their graves instead of having it being to the bush or haphazardly being done. And so it's significant for us because of the compassion of our descendants that had for these people, and also what I've heard, again, a story being told that the items that were found throughout the waters, like clothing or whatever, shoes or whatever, they were actually collected and returned and turned over to the administrator of the day. So again, it's something of significance to us that our descendants were part of this and very helpful and compassionate and taking into consideration the lives lost. So yes, it is very important.
So as I mentioned before, I know this year marks 150 years, and the National Parks Trust is collaborating with Dr. Kent to launch this book. What activities can we look forward to for that event?
Well, definitely the National Parks Trust, being the management agency of the Rhone, as it is a national park, they are in collaboration with us, as you said, in launching this particular book. So this book is kind of like the first unofficial activity to launch the celebrations. There are plans in motion to have a number of activities to commemorate this historical milestone. And the National Parks Trust is actually the lead agency in organizing these activities. At the moment, there are no set plans to announce, but just to say that there is a coordinating committee, and Dr. Kent and I are serving on that committee. So we should be hearing some information soon about the planned activities, because it's right now in the planning stage. But there are also other organizations that are planning activities like the BVI Dive Association. They also have some activities. So you'll be hearing quite a bit about the activities very soon.
I think it's important to remember, obviously, that this isn't a celebration, it's a commemoration. And one of the activities that will be taking place, I think, will be a wreath-laying ceremony for the victims who actually died on the shipwreck that day. We are in touch with the Mayor of Southampton's office in Hampshire in England, where a large majority of the crew members originally came from, and we're hoping that either we can have the Mayor come out here and commemorate with us, or at the very least the Hampshire Mayor's office has said that they'll be sending a wreath over for the commemoration ceremony.
Nice. Sounds like a good idea. Well, I want you to take us through the creative process of actually writing the book Twice She Struck.
Ultimately, the Rhone is one of the top 10 shipwrecks in the world. For people who dive shipwrecks, the Rhone consistently appears on the top 10 list of shipwrecks. And so it was important that the real story came out. And as a diving instructor who worked on the Rhone in the early 1990s, there were a number of stories that were being told by various diving instructors and people who took people to the shipwreck. Some of them were vaguely accurate, some of them were completely inaccurate. And ultimately, it was important that the real story came out. And so in researching for the book, I wanted to also tell the story of why the ship existed in the first place, why it was here in the British Virgin Islands, rather than just the wreck site itself. And so we go right towards the very beginning of the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, why it was founded, why there was a regular communications link between England and the British Virgin Islands, or the Virgin Islands in general, and ultimately what happened on that day. And in order to establish exactly what happened on that day, it was important that I found survivor accounts, and there were a number of survivor accounts that appear verbatim in the book, from people who are actually on board the ship as she went down. And so certainly some of the stories that have been told over the years could be clarified with the real thing.
What are some of the most surprising things you actually learned or researched about in creating this book?
I think the most exciting thing that I found was that the real story was more exciting than any of the diving instructor stories. As I said, some of these stories varied, and ultimately the real story, the actual events of what took place that day, and certainly some of the survival stories, for example, Jonathan Bailey, the young boy who climbed into a life ring and floated from Salt Island to Beef Island, and was then ultimately picked up and never let go of that life ring, and was eventually photographed with that life ring, which is the front cover of the book, really start to give a human element to the story of what happened on that day.
Very true. What would you like for persons to take away with them once they read this book?
The tragedy surrounding the shipwreck. It's important that stories like this aren't forgotten. Many people lost their lives that day, over 120 people, and it would be a shame to forget the memory of those people. Likewise, ultimately, the Rhone is a very important part of our tourism product, and so to have the real story out there, as I said, is far more exciting than the stories that people have been telling over the years, and hopefully it will encourage more people to come and visit Rhone and in turn contribute towards the tourism of the British Virgin Islands.
Agreed. Mrs. Hodge-Smith, one of the primary responsibilities of your department is dealing with the preservation of our culture and our history. How important is this book in the preservation of Virgin Islands history?
Well, definitely, as Dr. Kent mentioned, the significance of the commemoration why we're actually commemorating the wreck of this particular ship. It's part of our history. It actually happened in the Virgin Islands, and the human element, as he mentioned. So it gives information about this particular aspect of our history, so that persons can learn about it, particularly students who are doing research. So the book is significant, and that's one of the reasons why we are having these ceremonies, so that the word will get out that this book is actually available, like other books that we have launched and other books that are to come. Mm-hmm. So it's part of our DNA right now, to say, for want of a better word, because these book launch ceremonies have taken on a style of its own, in a sense, because like I said before, we don't know when the authors are working. We don't know what they're working on until we get a phone call or an email to say that I've published a book and would you help me to launch it. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting and fascinating when it's about the BVI's history and culture, although we would launch a book that doesn't necessarily pertain to our history or culture, once it's someone that's a Virgin Islander or a belonger, and it has something to do with the Virgin Islands. So it's it's a pleasant experience to learn about these things, and it helps to further develop or further enhance our literary arts and make us tell our stories instead of someone else that don't necessarily, as he mentioned, the dive stories that are being told about the site itself. It's better to get the actual truth and to get the information out there than to be hearing these other stories that aren't necessarily true. So the book is very significant and important.
Great. Dr. Kent, how can persons purchase your book?
The book's for sale in a variety of establishments here in the Virgin Islands. Certainly all of the dive shops carry copies of the book. Aragorn's studio at Trellis Bay is carrying copies, and BVI Sup Company on the cruise ship here is carrying copies as well. Island Roots on Main Street, the coffee shop, is carrying copies. And likewise, Admiral Marine at West End is carrying copies. Kindle has also produced an edition, and it's available worldwide on Amazon as well.
And can persons purchase the book during your book launch ceremony?
Absolutely, yes.
And get signed copies?
Yes.
Can we actually look forward to more books from you? Is this your first time writing?
It's my first time writing a book. I do a lot of academic papers, but these aren't things that generally come to light because they're for specific studies. I am in the process now of researching a book on piracy in the Virgin Islands, which is all of the Virgin Islands, both British and US, because this was an extremely important part of the history again. Was significant in creating the fabric of the Virgin Islands, and some of the famous names like William Kidd, Black Sam Bellamy, these people were all operating here in the Virgin Islands, and so I'm currently producing a book which will study their activities and the piracy as a whole here in the Virgin Islands.
I think that's something we can definitely look forward to in the future. I want to take this time to congratulate you for this book and for taking the time out to commemorate for this event or for the lives that were lost during the wreck of the Rhone.
Thank you very much.
I have been speaking with Director of the Department of Culture, Mrs. Luce Hodge-Smith, and author Dr. Michael Mitch Kent on the upcoming book launch for the book, Twice She Struck, The Story of RMS Rhone, set to be launched on Thursday, June 29th at the J.R O'Neal Botanic Gardens at 5:30 p.m. For the Department of Information and Public Relations and the Ministry of Education and Culture, I have been your GIS host, Bria Smith. Remember, for all your official government news and latest updates, visit the government website at www.bvi.gov.vg or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter at BVI Government.